The first mistake most people make is believing that silence is empty. It isn't. Silence is loaded. It is dense. It is pressure waiting to be released. The moment you speak without intention, you leak information, not facts position. You expose where you stand, what you want, what you fear, and how easily you can be moved. You think you're expressing yourself. In reality, you're mapping your weak points for anyone patient enough to listen. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago, long before microphones, social media, and endless opinions turned noise into a virtue. He saw what still escapes most people today. Power rarely announces itself. It observes. It waits. It lets others reveal themselves first. Look closely at any room where influence is at play. The loudest voice is almost never the most dangerous. The one arguing the hardest is rarely the one in control. The real center of gravity is usually silent, watching posture, tone, timing. While others speak to be understood, the strategist listens to understand how they can be undone. This is where most people lose before the game even begins. They talk to relieve discomfort. They speak to reduce tension. They explain to be liked. And every word they offer becomes raw material, reshaped, reframed, and eventually used against them. Silence terrifies the average mind because it removes feedback. No nods, no reassurance, no emotional mirrors. When the noise stops, people are left alone with themselves, and most cannot endure that encounter for long. They fill the space instinctively, the way a drowning man thrashes for air. That's the first hidden function of silence. It turns the other person into the speaker, and you into the listener. And the speaker always loses leverage. When someone talks freely, they reveal their priorities. Their insecurities bleed through word choice. Their ego announces itself in repetition. Their fear hides in over-explanation. Silence turns conversation into confession. Think of silence as a dark room. The moment you stop moving, others start bumping into the furniture of their own mind. They begin projecting. They assume. They invent meanings. And in doing so, they expose themselves far more than any interrogation ever could. Most people misunderstand this and think silence is passive. It's not. Silence is active restraint. It's a hand hovering over a blade, not because it cannot strike, but because it hasn't decided to yet. The more someone speaks, the more predictable they become. Patterns form. Triggers emerge. Reactions can be anticipated. Predictability is comfort for others, and death for power. Machiavelli warned that once people know what you want, they know how to control you. Desire disclosed becomes leverage surrendered. Fear confessed becomes a handle. Silence, on the other hand, keeps your inner terrain uncharted. This is why silence creates unease. When people can't read you, they can't place you. And when they can't place you, they don't know how to treat you. Respect begins here not in warmth, but in uncertainty. Consider how value works. Anything abundant is ignored. Anything rare is examined. Words are no different. When you speak constantly, your voice becomes background noise. When you speak selectively, your words gain weight before they even land. Scarcity creates gravity. A man who speaks only when necessary bends attention toward himself without asking for it. When he finally talks, the room adjusts. Bodies lean in. The air tightens. His words don't need to persuade. They arrive already charged. Most people sabotage themselves because they mistake explanation for strength. They believe clarity earns respect. In truth, over-clarity signals insecurity. It suggests that your position cannot stand on its own. Every unnecessary explanation is scaffolding around a weak structure. Silence does the opposite. It communicates internal stability. It says, "I don't need you to understand me in order to proceed." That alone unsettles people who rely on emotional control and validation loops. This is why silence feels like dominance when done correctly. Not because it intimidates, but because it refuses to participate in emotional bargaining. You are no longer negotiating your value in real time. Think of silence as armor that doesn't look like armor. There's no clanking, no threat display, just containment. Energy held inward instead of scattered outward. And here's the deeper layer most never reach. Silence doesn't just protect you from others. It protects you from yourself. From impulsive reactions, from ego-driven replies, from the need to win conversations that cost you position. Every time you speak immediately, you collapse the space between stimulus and response. Silence stretches that space. In that gap, choice lives. Strategy lives. Power lives. Machiavelli didn't admire silence because it was polite. He valued it because it created asymmetry. You know more, they know less. And asymmetry decides outcomes long before action begins. This is not about becoming cold or withdrawn. It's about becoming deliberate, about choosing when your voice enters the world and when it stays sheathed. A sword left on the table invites challenge. A sword kept unseen creates hesitation. Silence is that sheath. And once you understand this, you begin to see the world differently. Conversations slow down, provocations lose their pull. You stop feeling dragged into every exchange. You stop explaining yourself to people who haven't earned access to your reasoning. You realize something unsettling and liberating at the same time. Most people speak not to communicate, but to relieve anxiety. When you stop doing that, you separate yourself from the herd. You become still where others fidget. You become quiet where others rush. And in that stillness, something sharp begins to form. This is where silence stops being absence and becomes presence. And this is only the beginning. Once you understand silence as power, the next challenge appears immediately: tension. Most people break silence not because they have something to say, but because they cannot tolerate the pressure it creates. Silence is uncomfortable because it removes the illusion of control. When you stop reacting, the other person no longer knows where they stand. They don't know if you agree, if you're offended, if you're planning something, or if you've already dismissed them entirely. And the human mind hates unresolved states. This is where the psychological vacuum forms. Human interaction is built on rhythm. I speak, you respond. I smile, you mirror. It's a loop designed to regulate anxiety. Silence breaks that loop. And when the loop breaks, the nervous system panics. Watch what happens the next time you hold silence instead of filling it. The other person starts talking more. They clarify things you didn't question. They justify positions you never challenged. They negotiate against themselves without realizing it. Silence turns pressure outward. This is why skilled interrogators speak less than amateurs. This is why experienced negotiators go quiet at critical moments. This is why the most powerful people rarely rush to explain themselves. The moment you stop contributing to the rhythm, the burden of momentum shifts to the other side. And most people collapse under that weight. They mistake silence for judgment. They assume meaning where none was given. Their imagination starts working against them. Did I say something wrong? Am I being evaluated? Did I lose ground? That internal noise grows louder with every second you remain still. Silence forces others to confront themselves. Machiavelli advised rulers to let others reveal their intentions first, not because it was clever, but because it was efficient. When someone shows their hand voluntarily, you don't need to guess. You don't need to push. You simply observe. This principle applies everywhere. Negotiations, relationships, social dynamics, even conflict. The one who speaks first under pressure gives up position. The one who waits forces the other to define the frame. Think about how often you rush to soften moments. You explain your tone. You clarify your intent. You apologize preemptively. All of that is an attempt to reduce discomfort, usually yours. But power requires the ability to sit in discomfort without flinching. Silence is not the absence of action. It is delayed action. And delayed action terrifies people who rely on predictability. This is why silence feels aggressive even when it isn't. It disrupts expectation. It breaks cause and effect. An insult expects anger. A challenge expects defense. Silence gives neither. And in that gap, the aggressor loses footing. They don't know what comes next. Uncertainty is the root of fear. Most people want to be understood immediately. Strategists are willing to be misunderstood temporarily. That difference alone separates influence from submission. This brings us to one of the most destructive habits people carry without realizing it. The compulsion to justify, argue, defend, and explain. Not because it's necessary, but because it feels safe. Over-explaining is the language of low status. When you explain yourself unnecessarily, you implicitly accept that the other person has the right to question you. You step into the role of defendant without being asked. You shrink your position to fit inside their approval. A king does not explain his decisions to calm the crowd. A general does not debate orders with soldiers, not because they are cruel, but because authority dissolves the moment it begs for validation. Silence replaces explanation with ownership. If you make a decision, you let it stand. If you make a mistake, you acknowledge it briefly and move forward. No narrative, no emotional cushioning, no attempt to be liked in the aftermath. Strength doesn't ramble. It states and proceeds. Most people fear this because they confuse silence with guilt. They think that if they don't explain, they'll be judged negatively. But judgment is inevitable. You cannot control it, and trying to manage it only signals insecurity. Silence does something radical. It lets people misunderstand you without chasing their approval. That is sovereignty. When you stop explaining yourself, people adjust. Some resist, some project, some test boundaries. But eventually the dynamic recalibrates. They either rise to meet your standard or drift away. And that's not a loss. That's filtration. Silence also conserves energy. Talking drains you. Explaining drains you. Performing drains you. Most social exhaustion isn't physical, it's metabolic. You burn energy managing impressions instead of building direction. Silence plugs that leak. When you stop narrating your life, you reclaim focus. When you stop reacting to every stimulus, your mind clears. You begin thinking instead of responding, observing instead of performing. This is where silence becomes strategic distance. From distance, patterns emerge. You see who seeks control, who needs validation, who tests boundaries, who talks too much when nervous, who hides insecurity behind humor or aggression. You can't see the game while you're being pulled across the board. Silence pulls you out of the scramble. It turns you from a piece into a player. And slowly, something else happens. People start projecting strength onto you. Not because you claimed it, but because your restraint forces them to imagine it. They assume you know more. They assume you see more. They assume you're calculating, even when you're simply observing. Let them assume. Illusions are fragile. Silence preserves them. Words shatter them. This isn't about deception. It's about privacy. about refusing to give the world a complete map of your inner terrain. In an age obsessed with visibility, silence is rebellion. In a culture addicted to noise, silence is advantage. And once you feel this shift, you'll notice something unmistakable. The less you speak, the more carefully others choose their words around you. That's not coincidence. That's gravity forming. And next, we go even deeper into unpredictability, fear, and why silence doesn't just protect you. It destabilizes everyone who tries to control you. Silence doesn't just create distance. It creates unpredictability. And unpredictability is where fear is born, not panic, but the quiet, respectful fear that makes people hesitate before crossing a line. Most men are easy to read. Insult them, they flare up. Praise them, they soften. Ignore them, they chase. Their reactions are so consistent that anyone paying attention can steer them like machinery. This is not strength. This is automation. Machiavelli understood that the greatest vulnerability is not weakness, it's predictability. When people know how you will respond, they own you. They don't need force. They don't need authority. They only need to press the right button. Silence removes the buttons. When you don't react the way people expect, their internal map fails. The cause and effect loop breaks. They can no longer orient themselves around you. And without orientation, there is no control. This is why silence feels threatening to manipulative personalities. They rely on emotional feedback. They need confirmation that their tactics are working. When silence gives them nothing, they spiral. Observe what happens when someone tries to provoke you and you give them nothing. No anger, no defense, no visible hurt, just stillness. Their confidence collapses. They repeat themselves. They escalate. They overplay their hand. They expose intention through excess. Silence forces others to overextend. This is where fear enters. Not fear of violence, but fear of the unknown. The human mind is terrified of what it cannot predict, not because danger is certain, but because it might be. This is why silence carries more weight than threats. A threat defines the boundary. Silence leaves it undefined, and an undefined boundary forces caution. Machiavelli wrote that it is safer to be feared than loved. But fear does not mean noise. True fear is born from restraint, from the sense that something is being held back. A man who understands this doesn't rush to assert dominance. He allows others to feel it. Predictability is comforting. Unpredictability commands space. This applies everywhere, in relationships, in negotiations, in conflict, in leadership. The moment someone believes they understand you fully, they stop respecting you. Familiarity breeds contempt, not because closeness is bad, but because overexposure kills mystery. Silence restores mystery. When you stop broadcasting your thoughts, people start filling in the blanks themselves. They project competence. They project intention. They project authority. Not because you demanded it, but because the human mind cannot tolerate emptiness. Think of silence as fog on a battlefield. You may be standing still, but the enemy doesn't know where you are. They hesitate. They slow down. They waste energy trying to locate you. That hesitation is power. Most people rush to clarify misunderstandings. They chase perception. They explain themselves into submission. But every explanation removes uncertainty, and uncertainty is leverage. Silence keeps leverage intact. This is why oversharing is strategic suicide. When you tell people your plans, your fears, your frustrations, you illuminate your position. You turn on floodlights in terrain that should remain dark. Now they know where to aim. Machiavelli warned that those who reveal too much invite manipulation. Not because honesty is wrong, but because timing is everything. Information revealed prematurely becomes a weapon in someone else's hand. Silence protects timing. It allows you to choose when to be the fox and when to be the lion, to gather information quietly, to strike decisively, to disappear when necessary. And this is the part that unsettles people the most. Silence makes you ungovernable. You are no longer reacting to stimulus. You are choosing response. The gap between what happens and what you do widens. In that gap, autonomy lives. Most people live as slaves to impulse. Something happens. They react. They feel justified. They feel expressive. But they have surrendered control. The strategist does the opposite. He inserts silence. He slows the moment. He observes the internal surge and lets it pass. He understands that emotional control is not suppression. It is direction. Silence gives you that direction. When someone insults you and you don't respond, you are not weak. You are refusing to let them set the frame. You are denying them the satisfaction of control. This is why silence enrages manipulators. They cannot play a game if you don't follow the rules. You become a ghost, and you cannot fight a ghost. Silence also frees you from the need to perform. You no longer need to be witty. You no longer need to impress. You no longer need to be liked in real time. You become efficient. Efficiency is terrifying to those who rely on chaos. The quiet man in the room isn't silent because he has nothing to say. He's silent because he's deciding if saying anything is necessary at all. That distinction changes everything. When you master this, your presence shifts. People speak more carefully around you. They test less. They assume more. Not because you demanded respect, but because unpredictability forces caution. And caution is the foundation of power. Silence is not about disappearing completely. It's about choosing visibility strategically, about understanding that constant presence erodes value. Scarcity amplifies it. When you withdraw at the right moments, your absence speaks. People notice the void. They wonder. They reassess. And that reassessment elevates you without effort. This is not manipulation. It is self-command. You are no longer available on demand. You are no longer emotionally accessible to everyone. You are no longer explaining yourself to soothe others. You are conserving energy. And energy conserved becomes pressure. Pressure, when released at the right moment, ends conflicts before they begin. This is why silence is feared. This is why silence is respected. This is why silence is dangerous. And next, we take this further into absence. Energy conservation. And the moment silence stops being defense and becomes domination. Silence reaches its highest form when it turns into absence. Not retreat, not avoidance. Absence as position. Most people believe showing up constantly proves value. Being available, responsive, present at all times, this is sold as commitment. In reality, it is exposure. And exposure always carries a cost. Machiavelli understood something most never learn. Familiarity erodes authority. The more people see you, the more they believe they understand you. And the moment they believe they understand you, they stop respecting the space around you. Absence reverses that process. When you withdraw intentionally, you disrupt expectation. You break routines others unconsciously built around your availability. And when those routines collapse, people feel the loss before they understand it. They don't miss you. They miss access to you. That distinction matters. Most men exhaust themselves trying to be consistently present. They answer every message. attend every conversation, engage every conflict. They think this keeps them relevant. What it actually does is make them predictable, and predictability kills leverage. Absence restores leverage. When you stop showing up automatically, people recalibrate. They wonder where you went. They question what changed. They begin to feel the weight of your absence, not because you announced it, but because silence leaves a vacuum. And humans hate vacuums. Machiavelli wrote that a ruler must know when to appear and when to disappear, not out of arrogance, but out of strategy. Presence should never be accidental. It should be chosen. Think of absence like negative space in art. The empty areas don't weaken the image, they define it. They give form meaning. Without them, everything collapses into noise. Your absence does the same. When you step back, conversations shift. People speak differently when you're not always there to absorb tension, offer reassurance, or smooth friction. They reveal what they really think. They show how much they relied on your presence to regulate themselves. This is not punishment. It's exposure. Absence also protects your energy. Most exhaustion is self-inflicted, not from effort, but from over-engagement. You bleed attention into conversations that don't matter. You defend yourself against opinions that hold no authority. You invest emotional energy where no return exists. Silence seals the leak. Absence reinforces the seal. When you withdraw, your energy consolidates. Focus returns. Thinking sharpens. You stop reacting and start positioning. You become selective, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Machiavelli believed resources must be conserved. No empire is built by troops marching in circles. Energy wasted on trivial battles is energy unavailable when real decisions arrive. Silence preserves energy. Absence concentrates it. And concentrated energy feels dangerous to those who live in constant reaction. This is why people label withdrawal as cold, distant, arrogant. Not because it is, but because it removes something they were using. Your responsiveness, your explanations, your emotional labor. When that disappears, they feel exposed. Let them. Power is not built by comforting everyone around you. It is built by refusing to be consumed. Absence also does something else, something subtle and profound. It forces others to carry the weight of their own expectations. Without your constant presence, they confront their dependency, their entitlement, their assumption that you would always be there. That confrontation is uncomfortable, and discomfort is where dynamics change. When you return calm, measured, unchanged, you are no longer part of the old rhythm. You are perceived differently, not louder, not more aggressive, just less available. Availability is currency. Spend it carelessly, and it becomes worthless. Spend it deliberately, and it gains power. Machiavelli never encouraged isolation. He encouraged control. Control over timing. Control over exposure. Control over when your presence enters the field and when it remains unseen. This is why absence increases respect without confrontation. You don't need to demand it. You don't need to assert it. You simply stop giving yourself away, and something shifts. People start listening more closely when you speak. They stop assuming immediate access. They measure words around you, not because you threaten them, but because your absence introduced consequence. Absence creates memory. The man who is always present fades into background. The man who appears rarely, deliberately, becomes unforgettable. His presence is felt before he arrives. This is not about disappearing forever. It's about refusing to be constantly visible, about understanding that being seen too often erodes impact. Silence builds the foundation. Absence builds the structure. Together, they transform you from participant to force. And here's the truth most avoid. When you withdraw, some people will leave. That's not failure, that's filtration. Those who only valued your accessibility will drift away. Those who respect your boundaries will adjust. The environment reorganizes around your new position. That is power asserting itself quietly. You are no longer explaining. You are no longer reacting. You are no longer available on demand. You are choosing, and choice is the core of dominance. Silence taught you restraint. Unpredictability taught you fear. Absence teaches consequence. One final piece remains. Because silence alone is a shield, and shields do not win wars. In the final part, you will learn when silence must end, when action must speak, and how a single decisive move, after prolonged quiet, reshapes the entire field. Wait for it. Silence was never meant to last forever. It was meant to prepare you. A shield protects. It hides. It absorbs blows. But no shield has ever won a war. Silence is the same. It preserves your position, sharpens your awareness, and drains others while you conserve strength. But eventually, power must move. The mistake most people make is confusing silence with hesitation. They think waiting means weakness. In reality, waiting is how strength is refined. Machiavelli understood that action without timing is just noise, and noise exposes you. Silence gathers the field. Action decides it. When you stay quiet, people talk themselves into mistakes. They reveal motives. They show impatience. They overplay their hand. Meanwhile, your intent becomes simpler, cleaner, more precise. You are no longer reacting, you are choosing. That choice is everything. Impulsive action is emotional. It leaks insecurity. It seeks relief. Strategic action is different. It does not release pressure. It concentrates it, then ends the situation in a single move. This is why decisive action after silence feels overwhelming. The quiet lowered expectations. Others forgot you were calculating. They assumed restraint meant doubt. And when you finally act, the contrast shocks them. Machiavelli warned against constant motion because motion signals fear. The man who rushes shows need. The man who waits shows control. Fortune favors the one who can endure tension without flinching. Silence trains that endurance. It teaches you to hold discomfort without explaining yourself, to resist the urge to clarify, justify, or defend, to let uncertainty work in your favor. Over time, silence builds internal authority. You no longer need approval to move. So when you act, it is final. You don't argue. You don't announce. You don't explain afterward. You let reality do the speaking. A boundary enforced through action once is stronger than endless verbal warnings. A clean decision ends negotiations that words would only prolong. This is where silence stops being defensive and becomes dominant. After long restraint, action carries weight. People feel it instantly. They sense that the quiet before it was not confusion, it was calculation. And once the action is done, you return to silence. Not out of fear, but because nothing more is required. Excess words would only weaken the impact. This rhythm, silence, observation, action, silence, is the rhythm of control. It makes you unpredictable without chaos, calm without passivity, powerful without noise. Something changes permanently when you live this way. You stop being pulled into every conflict. You stop explaining your decisions. You stop reacting to every provocation. Your inner state becomes sovereign. People notice it in your pauses, in how you don't rush, in how you move without broadcasting intent. You are no longer competing for attention. You are selecting moments. Machiavelli never promised comfort. He promised clarity. The world does not reward those who speak the most. It responds to those who control timing, perception, and force. Silence gives you vision. Absence gives you leverage. Action gives you outcome. Together, they form a complete system. Silence is no longer something you tolerate. It becomes something you wield. And when you finally break it, the world listens not because you asked it to, but because it understands what your silence has been preparing. That is the final lesson. Silence is your most dangerous weapon not because it hides you, but because it teaches you when not to move, and when one move is enough.